Hello everybody, I am the Indoor Adventurer. You are watching Simple and Keen,
And today we are going to be talking about the impact of dynamic non-player characters.
On a dark and stormy night in 1978, Tracy Hickman was playing a game of Dungeons & Dragons and was crawling through yet another series of random encounters when he faced an enemy that would leave a lasting impression on him. This creature, a vampire. But that was it. This vampire was just another creature amongst the waves of goblins, orcs, oozes, and trolls. In the foreword of the 5th edition adventure module, The Curse of Strahd, Hickman recalls thinking about how out of place he felt this vampire was, and how this creature deserved its own setting and to be more than just a wandering monster. While still working on self-published adventures in 1978, Hickman and his wife Laura began working on an adventure originally known as Vampire, and it would be about 4 years later in 1982 when they began writing Dungeons & Dragons adventures for TSR, and the Hickmans would deliver the horrifying Strahd von Zarovich to the world of tabletop gaming. Strahd was much more than a vampire who taught children how to count or said blah as a gang of kids and a dog snooped around an abandoned castle. Instead, Strahd was a selfish beast, forever lurking behind a mask of tragic romance with the illusion of redemption that was ever only camouflage for his prey. Rather than just being another throwaway villain, Strahd became cemented in his own campaign setting, which would become one of the longest-running settings for Dungeons & Dragons. The Ravenloft campaign would begin to put an emphasis on DM roleplay as well, for while Strahd might have been cold and calculating, he still operated in a fashion that would require the Dungeon Master to come face to face with their players. There are many situations which the players could be bribed or coerced by Strahd in exchange for their servitude or fealty. For example, Strahd might sense dark powers in a more proactive party member, and if the party member proved themselves, Strahd would make them the new ruler of the demi-plane of Barovia. Likewise, perhaps a party member has come to Barovia in hopes to find a cure for a disease that has plagued their family for generations, but only Strahd knows the cure's whereabouts. Because of how ingrained Strahd is into every facet of the Ravenloft setting, he has every opportunity to insert himself into the lives of players without the risk of immediate harm coming to himself, and it is up to the creativity of the Dungeon Master to best utilize the dark powers of Barovia to the best of their ability to truly give their players a memorable experience. To help put this into perspective, before Ravenloft, one of the more notable adventure modules was the Tomb of Horrors, written by the late Gary Gygax, in which players had minimal interaction with antagonistic forces outside of encounters such as huge pit with 200 spikes, among other environmental-based hazards. Villains with their own backstories, motives, and ideals seemed very few and far between, so the emergence of an NPC that commanded such a presence was exactly what the game was needing. Thankfully, the idea of creating and running campaigns with dynamic villains has become much more popularized in more recent editions of Dungeons & Dragons, for while doing research on this video, I looked at the Dungeon Master's Guide from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons from 1979 as I was curious to see what advice was given to someone wanting to play a villain in a time before Strahd, and I was startled to see that there was nothing to help the DM. There were rules to playing several forms of lackeys, but as far as a more dynamic character, the most help that we get is each and every monster must be played as closely to its stated characteristics as is possible. Clever ones should be played with cleverness, stupid ones with stupidity, ferocious ones with ferocity, cowardly ones with cowardice, and so on. Thanks. There is so little to go off here other than the basics of what makes an NPC that we can see why Tracy Hickman would be so inspired to create a much more compelling character in the form of Strahd that redefined how we think about villains in tabletop gaming. Thankfully, now that we are in the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, compelling villains have come to such a forefront that there are a variety of tables and other useful tools to create villains with their own set of motivations and ideals as outlined on page 94 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. The Dungeon Master even has the option of turning the more devout player classes into twisted versions of themselves, in the form of the Death Domain Cleric and the Oathbreaker Paladin, as the light that once burned within them has become replaced by darkness and hatred. And while 5th edition might have included a pretty robust system for creating villains, I would argue that the Book of Vile Darkness by Monty Cook has some of the best outlines for creating a truly dynamic villain. That isn't to say that Cook's version is hands down the best, but it is what I have found myself more drawn to as a DM because it provides examples of nuance that you can utilize in order to craft a genuinely creepy villain, such as how to use body parts of your lessers to power incredibly strong blood magics to overcast your spells. The Book of Vile Darkness from 4th edition, and also not by Monty Cook, is certainly a much more accessible version of this book, as it doesn't laud the mature audiences only sticker, but it still provides good examples on how to use the tiers of play system from the Dungeon Master's Guide to create an outline for antagonists for the party based on the circumstances around the party or villain. But villains aren't the only thing that make up a world full of adventure and intrigue. There are many different ways that you as a dungeon master can create NPCs that all have their own backstories and connections within the world, as otherwise it feels as though you are being dropped into a freshly baked world where these non-player characters are simply out to complete a routine cycle. There isn't anything wrong with a blacksmith whose sole purpose in life is the forge, but if there are world events happening to that character, it would be incredibly off-putting to see no real change in the behavior of this character. It is the difference between talking with another person and hitting the end of your canned dialogue options in a role-playing game, as you will only get a set of numbered responses. That isn't to say that you can't still have fun with this kind of option for your non-player characters, as you could make them staunchly defiant of change, or have them exhibit a refusal to acknowledge any form of life-changing event, but just you making that decision for that character means you are already giving them a dynamic aspect. As you channel the powers of an overbeing when creating a world full of lore, magical items, pantheons, or even mundane creations, you have the opportunity to do whatever you want in whatever manner that you please. While the world that you create is primarily for your players, you can use this world as an opportunity to explore with different narratives, plots, or hone your skills in regards to describing smaller details. And there are always opportunities for your players to take the reins of aspects of the world as well. In most campaigns that I've been a part of, there is typically an NPC that the players will grow attached to for whatever reason. Maybe this character always treated the players kindly at a magic shop, so the party continues to return there just so they can communicate with someone who isn't actively trying to kill them. It is in our nature as players to find ways to become more attached to a fictional world through a variety of means, and NPCs provide a perfect solution to this issue of player agency. Some characters are able to force this player agency through classes such as the Ranger or Druid that provide bonuses to having a pet on you, or spells such as Find Familiar, which give your player a variety of choices to pick from for their summoned friend. Other characters, such as the Bard, tend to find themselves surrounded by people with whom they can communicate and interact, and with the criminal background, just about every class has the possibility of having a contact within the criminal underworld that they can call upon. Just based on the number of characters your players might have a run-in with, they are bound to find at least one that they connect with on some level. Humanoids, monsters, magical items, the list goes on and on for all of the things that your players can find themselves going out of their way to return to in camaraderie. In the game that I have been a part of for the past 4 years, our characters have met with must be hundreds of NPCs, both heroes and villains alike, but none of them meant as much to us as our friend Shaky Ben, a retired halfling thief whose shaking hands prevented him from being able to open locks the way that he used to. Our characters all initially met up because we were part of a mob within the walls of the capital city, and our mob boss introduced us to who we would eventually know as Shaky Ben. Shaky Ben was with us at almost every turn, always hooking us up with sweet quests or amazing gear, and he was our general informant for the happenings of the town for when we needed the scoop on what had occurred while we had been venturing. For 3 years, Shaky Ben had continued to provide his service to us as a friend and companion, and on the dawn of an inner-city war, we all agreed that after this was over, we would go to a bar where we first met up at and get drinks to celebrate our triumph. Our characters went off to fight the main baddie, while Shaky Ben and his crew held the front lines with the best our mob had to offer. This battle was insanely tough, and was one of the closest calls that our party had ever faced in terms of nearing a total party kill. We managed to make it out in barely one piece, but as we approached with the body of the enemy's leader slumped over our fighter's shoulder, we saw a small halfling body lying amongst the turmoil. Our promise to all get drinks together after the war would feel like the most hollow victory. For while we had won the war and saved the city, our hearts were heavy with the passing of Shaky Ben. Now, over a year later, we have built a statue in his honor and still reminisce about how great of a character he was, even when we're not playing at the table. With certain NPCs, you might spend days, even weeks, planning out intricate backstories and developing their ideals and bonds, only to have your players never interact with that character. You might be completely taken off guard when your players have taken a shine to whom you regarded as peasant number 4, and now you have to figure out how Dennis the farmer is going to interact with your players in his own way. Dennis might not be able to throw an extravagant feast or spectacular ceremony in which the players are lauded as heroes, but he would still be willing to invite them to a dinner with his family. family. Now that this farmer has a name, background, and familial situation, I'm sure that there very well might be one of you listening who would already want to spend more time with Dennis on his farm if you could. However, depending on who you have at your table, the idea of spending a night with a small family sounds like the exact opposite of what they're looking for out of an adventure. In this case, you can provide them with a compelling villain to hunt down. Or perhaps because of the player's actions, they have caused events that create their next villain. Maybe your players would rather just fight monsters and not worry about much of a plot. And at that point, perhaps they befriend the guild master of a monster hunting guild, and whenever they are in need of the next baddie to face, they can interact with them. The worlds you create are filled to the brim with all kinds of pets, friends, and familiars, and it's up to you as the dungeon master to give even a semblance of life to these NPCs to not only progress the game, but to help provide characters for your players to get attached to that help establish their immersion in the world of tabletop gaming. And speaking of growing attached to NPCs, some of you may be wondering how the fighter in your group from the last episode is doing. Don't fret, all is well. He is currently just enjoying a nice family dinner with Dennis the farmer while he tells Dennis about how simple subscribing to the Simple and Keen YouTube channel was, and how easy it was to find Simple and Keen on Facebook and Twitter as well. Before I go, I just wanted to say thank you all for stopping by and listening to this video. All of your comments have been extremely helpful in figuring out what I want to do for my next video, so keep at it, and who knows, maybe the next video I cover will have your suggestion in it.
So remember, keep your wits sharp and your blades sharper.